There is a plant that grows along the edges of the ancient roads of Judea. It is not rare, it is not beautiful. It is the kind of thorned shrub that goats avoid and travelers push aside without thinking. Its branches are long and brittle. Its thorns are curved and dense, growing in pairs, one pointing forward, one pointing back, designed by nature to catch, to hold, to tear. The Romans knew this plant. And on a Friday morning in Jerusalem, someone took the time to weave it. In this exploration, we will not look away from the crown of thorns. We will not rush past it toward the resurrection or soften it into symbol before we have understood it as event. We will stand inside the Praetorium, inside the noise and the laughter of soldiers who believed they were mocking a failed king. We will examine the thorns themselves, their botany, their biology, the specific cruelty of their design. We will ask why this plant, why this moment, and why the one who wore it did not remove it. Because the crown of thorns is not merely an instrument of suffering. It is a statement, a theological provocation, a collision between two kingdoms, one built on humiliation and force, the other on something the soldiers in that room could not yet name. What kind of king receives a crown of thorns and does not retaliate? What kind of power absorbs mockery and transforms it into meaning? Prepare yourself to see what the surface of this story has always concealed. To understand what happened that morning in the Praetorium, you must first understand the world in which it happened. Not the sanitized world of painted icons and cathedral windows, but the raw, loud, politically charged world of first-century Roman-occupied Jerusalem, a city that smelled of blood and burning sacrifice, of olive oil and unwashed stone, of an empire that had learned to govern through theater as much as through force. Rome was, above all, a civilization of symbols. Every gesture of power was choreographed. The laurel wreath, that crown of green leaves pressed onto the brow of a general returning from conquest, or an emperor presiding over games, was not mere decoration. It was a language. It said, "This man has triumphed. This man is elevated above other men. The gods have smiled on him." To place a wreath upon a man's head was to acknowledge publicly that the cosmos had appointed him. To place a wreath upon a man's head and laugh was to say the opposite, to say that the idea of his kingship was itself the joke. The soldiers who gathered in Pilate's Praetorium were not philosophers. They were garrison soldiers, men accustomed to the tedium of colonial posting, to managing the crowds of a conquered people whose religious convictions baffled and irritated them. When a prisoner was brought in, already beaten, already bleeding, and that prisoner was accused of claiming to be the king of the Jews, they saw an opportunity for the kind of entertainment that long deployments bred, the brutal theater of mockery. Someone went looking for a plant. The Ziziphus spina Christi, the Christ thorn jujube, was common in the region. It grew along roads, in dry riverbeds, along the edges of gardens. Shepherds knew it. Farmers cursed it when it tangled their tools. Its branches were flexible enough to bend, sturdy enough to hold a shape. And its thorns, this is what matters, its thorns were not simply sharp. They grew in pairs, opposing directions, so that any motion, any slight shift of the head would drive one into flesh, while the other caught and pulled. There was no safe direction of movement. Every nerve response to pain would produce more pain. This was not an accident of botany. The soldiers who chose this plant understood at some level what it would do. They were men who had seen wounds. They understood pressure and nerve and the physics of tearing skin. The crown they wove was not decorative. It was functional, a wearable instrument of ongoing torment, one that punished even the attempt to endure it. They placed a reed in his right hand, a mock scepter. They draped a purple robe around his shoulders. Purple, the color of imperial authority, the color that only the powerful wore, the color that cost more than most men earned in a year. And then they knelt before him, one after another, in the exaggerated theatrical prostration of subjects before a king, and they said, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they struck him, And they spat on him, and they took the reed from his hand and drove the crown deeper with it. This is what the text records. Matthew 27, Mark 15, John 19. It is worth pausing here and refusing to move past this too quickly. The mockery in that room was specific. It was not random cruelty. It was a precise theological inversion, a parody of coronation, of kingship, of the entire concept of sacred authority. Every element was chosen to reverse meaning. The crown that punctured instead of honoring, the scepter that was a weed, the purple robe that had no imperial legitimacy behind it, the prostration that was contempt performing the shape of reverence. The soldiers were not simply hurting a man. They were staging a ceremony designed to prove through humiliation that the claim was absurd, and the one they mocked did not speak. Isaiah had seen this moment from 7 centuries away and had written of it in terms that still make the careful reader stop breathing. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth, like a lamb led to the slaughter. The prophet had framed it as willingness, not weakness, not inability to respond, but a deliberate chosen silence in the face of the violence being done. To understand why this silence is not passivity, you have to understand who the text says is wearing that crown. The Gospel of John opens not with a birth narrative, not with genealogy, but with cosmology. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. All things were made through him, and without him nothing was made that was made. John is insisting from his very first sentence that the figure who would walk through his gospel is not a remarkable human being who was later elevated to divine status. He is insisting that the one who walked through Galilee healing the sick, the one who stood at the tomb of Lazarus and wept, the one who now stands inside the Praetorium wearing a crown of thorns, this one was present at the moment matter first sang into existence. This is what makes the crown of thorns not merely an act of cruelty, but a collision of cosmological proportions. The soldiers placed thorns on the head of the one through whom, the text insists, the very plants of the earth were spoken into being. They wove a crown from creation and pressed it into the skull of the Creator. This is not a metaphor to be appreciated from a distance. This is a theological confrontation of staggering intensity, one that the soldiers who performed it could not understand, and which the one who endured it had chosen to absorb in silence. But we must go further back, because the thorn does not begin in the Praetorium. The thorn begins in a garden. Genesis 3, the judgment that follows the first act of human disobedience, includes a word about the ground. Cursed is the ground because of you. In toil you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you. The thorn, this specific botanical reality, the thing that catches and tears, that turns the simple act of walking through a field into an encounter with pain. The thorn is cursed ground vocabulary. It is the earth speaking the language of consequence. It is the physical world made sharp by the weight of a broken relationship between creation and Creator. When the soldiers reached for the Ziziphus Spina Christi, they were, without knowing it, reaching for a symbol older than Rome, older than Jerusalem, older than any empire that had ever cast its shadow across that region. They were reaching for the thorns of Genesis 3. They were pressing into the skull of one man, the accumulated symbol of everything that had gone wrong between the human race and the divine. The consequence, the curse, the painful harvest of a world that had chosen its own way, and he let them. This is the theological weight that every serious engagement with this image must carry. The one who wore the crown of thorns was wearing the curse, not merely experiencing pain, but absorbing into his own flesh the symbolic load of the broken world. Paul, writing to the Galatians, reaches for legal language to describe what this means. Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law by becoming a curse for us, for it is written, "Cursed is everyone who is hanged on a tree." The same vocabulary appears in Deuteronomy 21, where the one executed by hanging is described as bearing the curse of God. Paul sees the crucifixion as a transaction involving the curse vocabulary of Scripture, and the crown of thorns, pressed into the skull before the execution even began, was already participating in that transaction. There is something else in the Praetorium that the text preserves, and it arrives with particular force in John's account. When Pilate brings the beaten, crowned, robed figure before the crowd outside, he says to them, "Behold the man," in Latin, the language of empire, ecce homo. It is a phrase that has echoed through centuries of art and theology and human reflection on this moment. And it is worth asking what Pilate intended by it, and what the text intends by preserving it. Pilate was trying to satisfy the crowd, to deflect the execution by offering a spectacle of sufficient suffering. He was saying, in effect, "Look how thoroughly he has been broken. Surely this is enough. The man is no threat. Look at him." But the text of John has been building towards something that Pilate could not see. John's Gospel opened with the declaration that the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. The Greek word for man that Pilate uses, anthropos, is the same category that John has been tracking throughout his Gospel: the human being, the flesh, the embodied presence of the one who entered the world he had made. When Pilate says, "Behold the man," he is saying it mockingly, dismissively, as evidence of harmlessness, but the text hears it as revelation. Behold the man. This is what the second Adam looks like. This is what humanity carrying the curse looks like. This is the image. The soldiers in the Praetorium had chosen their plant for reasons of cruelty and entertainment. But the plant they chose was growing in the wrong fields of accursed ground, in the landscape produced by the rupture at the beginning of human history. When they wove the thorns and pressed them down, they were, without any theological intention, without any awareness of what they were participating in, performing an act that the text understands as reversal. The curse, concentrated. The thorn, gathered. The weight, placed. And then something shifts in the narrative, because after the crown of thorns, after the purple robe, after the reed and the prostration and the striking and the spitting, the Gospel of John records a moment of extraordinary stillness. Pilate, increasingly unsettled, goes back inside and asks the prisoner the only question that matters: "Where are you from?" And the prisoner does not answer. Pilate pushes, "Don't you know I have the power to release you or crucify you?" And the response, when it comes, is not a plea for mercy and not a demonstration of defiance. It is a statement of cosmological architecture. You would have no authority over me at all unless it had been given to you from above. The one wearing the crown of thorns is not a man trapped in a situation beyond his control. The text insists on this, steadily and without apology. He had told his disciples in the garden the night before, "Do you think I cannot call on my Father, and he will at once put at my disposal more than 12 legions of angels?" The crown was not forced upon a helpless prisoner. It was accepted by one who had chosen to be there, who had set his face toward Jerusalem, who had said in the garden moments before his arrest, "Not my will, but yours be done." This is the theological core that makes the crown of thorns not a symbol of defeat, but a symbol of the most radical act of authority the human story has ever encountered. The authority to absorb, to bear, to carry, instead of destroy. The harvest of the cursed ground, pressed into the skull of the one who had spoken the ground into being, carried not in anger but in silence, not by compulsion but by choice. Paul returns to this again in his second letter to the Corinthians, and the sentence he writes is one of the most compressed theological statements in Scripture. For our sake, he made him to be sin who knew no sin, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. Not merely that he suffered for sin, that he became sin, that the category was absorbed, inhabited from the inside, so that the category itself could be dealt with at its root. The crown of thorns is, in this reading, not merely an instrument of Roman cruelty. It is the thorn-curse of Genesis 3, gathered up and placed on the one head in human history that could bear it without being defined by it. The thorns went in. The curse did not win. After the crucifixion, after the burial, after the silence of the sealed tomb, the Gospel of John records the resurrection encounter in a garden. And it is a detail so carefully placed that it cannot be accidental. Mary Magdalene, arriving at the empty tomb before dawn, weeps outside. She turns and sees a man, and she does not recognize him immediately. She supposes him to be the gardener. In the Garden of Genesis, it was the ground that was cursed, the ground that began to produce thorns, the ground that resisted the labor of human hands because something fundamental had broken between creation and its maker. The first garden was the site of the rupture. The Garden of Resurrection is the site of the reversal, and the risen one, encountered in the garden, is mistaken for the one who tends the ground, as if the text is whispering what it cannot quite bring itself to shout. The curse is over. The gardener has come back to his garden. The disciples did not understand this immediately. Understanding came in layers, over years, as they turned the events over and over in the light of the scriptures they had grown up with. Peter, standing in front of a crowd in Jerusalem weeks after the events of the Praetorium, speaks of a man attested by God with mighty works and wonders and signs, and also of a man whom lawless men nailed to a cross. The same event is both human atrocity and divine purpose. The soldiers who pressed the thorns down did not know they were participating in the central act of human history. They were performing mockery. The text insists they were performing something else entirely, and this is where the ancient story refuses to remain ancient. Every generation has its Praetorium. Every age has its theater of humiliation, its mechanisms for reducing the claims of the sacred to something manageable, mockable, safe. The question of whether any authority exists above the authority of power, whether any king exists who does not derive his crown from force, is not a first-century question. It is a permanent human question, and the societies that most aggressively answer it by saying no, by insisting that power is its own legitimacy, that the strong define the real, are the societies that find themselves sooner or later standing in the Praetorium, reeds in hand, performing ceremonies of contempt. The thorn of Genesis 3 is still growing, the ground is still cursed. The human capacity to take the sacred and dress it in mockery and call it entertainment has not diminished across the centuries. What changes is only the costume. The purple robe takes different shapes. The reed becomes different instruments of dismissal. The laughter sounds different in different rooms. But the figure who walked out of that Praetorium and through the streets of Jerusalem and up to the hill outside the city did not walk that road because power left him no choice. He walked it because the text, in every layer of its witness, insists that something was being carried that morning, that no other set of shoulders in human history could have carried. The weight of the thorn curse, the accumulated consequence of the broken ground, the full cost of what Genesis 3 had set in motion. He wore the thorns so that, according to the text, the ground would not have to produce them forever. The questions this raises are not comfortable ones. They are not meant to be. The crown of thorns is not a sentimental image, it is a violent one, pressed into the skull of one who bore it willingly, and the willingness is the most disturbing part. Not the thorns, the willingness. A man forced into suffering is a victim. A creator entering human suffering by choice, absorbing the very symbol of the world's brokenness into his own body. That is something that does not fit comfortably into any category our ordinary moral reasoning has prepared for. The soldiers in the Praetorium wanted to prove that the kingship was absurd. They pressed the thorns down to make that point unmistakably clear. The text has spent 2,000 years making a different point, that the one who wore the crown without removing it, the one who carried the curse wood up the hill without calling down the legions, the one who was mistaken for a gardener in the Garden of Resurrection, that one was not wearing the thorns as evidence of defeat. He was wearing them as evidence of something that has never, in any language or century, found a fully adequate name. If this exploration has stirred something in you, if you want to keep walking through Scripture with this kind of depth and reverence, consider subscribing to this channel and staying with us for what comes next.